You're a hairy wizard. Wait. You're a wizard. Wait. Harry, you're a wizard.
And with that Freudian slip and Mandela effect, we are back for the first time this year, 2023. Welcome to the 800s. You heard from my lovely co-host Adam, and I am your fellow co-host Alex. And as always, thank you for rallying and getting us working again. Tech guy Alan. So we also apologize for the delay in the weekends, but even the best of us cannot prevent ISPs from ruining internet service. So with that, why don't we just jump into our plugs?
Yeah, sure thing. First off, I'm happy you got what I was trying to do there. That was good. If you joined us for our pre-show, you heard some music. That music was Fearless First by Incompetech. Incompetech has a bunch of cool scores and music that you should check out and use for ambiance or maybe some background in your own videos or podcasts. If you would like to check them out, go to incompetech.filmmusic.io. I'd also like to direct you guys to our YouTube channel. We're the DM's Table on YouTube. The link is below the video. That's where we post all of our videos, including our super awesome book discussions on the 800s, as well as some of our podcast stuff and some other videos that we do as well. And also, I'd like to mention that we have an Etsy page. Etsy is a cool platform that allows creators like ourselves to sell stuff we create to people who enjoy what we do, like you. If you would like to check out what we have for sale, go to dmstable.com/Etsy. Patreon is how we pay the bills primarily around here. The link for our Patreon page is below the video. If you'd like to help us out and subscribe to our Patreon, that gives you the ability to vote on what book we read next. Head to the link below the video there and check it out. And finally, I'd like to mention Audible. Audible is the main platform I personally use to listen to audiobooks. I'm a big fan of audiobooks in general, just because it allows you to multitask and really gives you a different medium to experience books in. It's quite the experience that I never thought I would enjoy until I tried it. So you should try it, Tool. Yeah, you should try it too, not Tool. Go to dmstable.com/audible for a 1-month free trial. Over to you, all Alex.
Right. So this week on the 800s, we'll be discussing one of the best-selling books of all time at, I believe, about 120 plus million copies. Harry Potter and the Sorcerers, or Philosopher's Stone, depending on where you're from, by J.K. Rowling. The 11-year-old orphan Harry Potter lives in his normal house and in as normal a neighborhood as can be, with his dreadful aunt, uncle, and cousin. What he does not know is that he is a part of a much wider world, the world of wizards and magic, that hides itself in plain sight, right in front of us non-magical muggle folk. Even among wizards, he has a greater destiny since his birth, having caused the downfall of the darkest wizard in history as a mere baby. Now, as an initiate to the wizarding school of Hogwarts, Harry Potter's destiny will bring him up against his oldest enemy again, as well as the Sorcerer's Stone.
Yeah, it's very exciting. I know for a lot of us, this is not our first read-through. So it's exciting to be able to discuss it and see what we all think about this young reader book that has brought many into the world of literature. If this is your first time joining us tonight, I'll go over exactly how our show operates here. So we are question and topic based discussion. What that question or topic is determined by Alex, myself, or you, the viewer. If you have something you would like to talk about the book, throw it into the chat. We'll look over there, see that you have something you want to talk about, and we'll pose it as a topic or question for discussion. Alex and I will talk back and forth to give you guys some time to weigh in. with your own opinions on the topic or question, and then we'll move on forward to the next one. So really the best way that this show flows forward is if some people in the chat section drop us some questions. So feel free to do that at any time, whenever the urge strikes you.
And as always, this is a show that is geared towards adults, and we do cover adult situations and topics. So bring minors around at your own discretion. And also, specifically for this book, we are going to be talking about the book and the book only. We are going to be separating art from artist. We do not espouse or agree with the values of the author, but we are here to discuss the book. Please keep it to that, because we here at DM's Table are trying to create a community that is fun and supportive of all types of hobbies and interests, and we don't want anybody to feel judged or like they can't express their interest in something for fear of retaliation. So in sum, be nice or fuck off.
With addendums. So with that, let's get right into it. What were your guys' thoughts on the intro to this book? And also, as a little beside, why don't we throw in when was the first time that you actually read this book?
Well, the first time I read this book wasn't until I was like probably like 13 or so, but I was read this book initially about the time that I was like 11 or 12. It was a Christmas gift, and my mom was the one reading it to me and my sister. And so I didn't personally read it myself for a while, but because I reread it right before the second book was due to come out. And or second or third book, I can't remember which off the top of my head, but one of the two was about to come out, and I reread it. But my initial impressions this time around are, I think because I spent my time reading it as I was the target demographic. Like by age, I was exactly the target demographic. And it felt a lot more simplistic this time reading it through, at least conceptually speaking. I was a bit surprised at like how good the prose of it was overall, considering that it was, how relatable it was, considering that it's based in England, and the prose is very much English, but it still felt very easily relatable, I guess. Rowling did a good job of creating characters that fit archetypes that are very easy to say, oh, I know somebody like that. And because she created a world where it literally exists like in the shadows of our own, like literally, like it could be like the main character could be anybody, and so it's hard not to draw people in, especially when you're the target demographic. So I see I've found myself seeing like, yeah, I get why this got popular so quickly. Why it would suck people in from all over the world, even if it was a lot more simplistic than I remembered.
Yeah. I think V.S. Drake brought up a good point in here too, that we should establish the target audience for Harry Potter. Alex, you kind of brought that up already, but I wanted to extrapolate more on that. So you already said that you were the first time read through, you were the target audience. But I would agree that a young reader is probably the intended audience. Almost it's almost easy enough to say the intended audience is the person who is near or the same age as Harry is through this book. Which is always how I felt about it is, as Harry ages up, J.K. Rowling kind of tackles more and more serious situations and stuff, which is kind of a cool experience to read these as they release, as we're aging up, along with the books. I felt like it went really well. But for me, the first time I read it was also around 12. Fun story about that, actually. Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone was my first novel. I got it off of one of those Scholastic book magazine things.
Yep.
And I saw it because it was listed as a bestseller. I was like, I want that. And then I got it, and I read one chapter, and I threw it in my closet and forgot about it. Come to like a year later, and my parents were like, you got to clean your room. It's a mess. So I started cleaning my closet, found the book, and read the entire thing instead of cleaning my room. So I was probably a little bit too young the first time I picked it up, but a year later, however old I was, I'm not entirely sure anymore, but however old I was then, I was apparently mature enough at that point to understand the book better and be more tolerant of sitting for long periods of time and reading.
Yeah, it's surprising like how much that makes a difference. Like the only reason why I got through it before you did is because I had an adult reading it to me, whereas like I fully read it through. I don't think it was my first read through. In fact, like weirdly, I think my first ever novel read through. I don't know how I did it, but it was Ender's Game.
Wow.
And to go from like that to Harry Potter, I think it was kind of a dose of like, I don't know. It was just like, it was simple. It was a lot easier to take on because I remember Ender's Game like really fucking with me like pretty hard. And,
yeah, I gotta say, like in terms of simplicity, Harry Potter here is like, I swear, J.K. Rowling had a list of how to write a novel that she just put out, and then on each bullet point, she just filled in her story and then went to the next bullet point. Like it is very concise, and it's exactly what you would expect to see from a fantasy novel, in my opinion, in terms of setup and characters and all that.
Yeah, and maybe that's a good way to segue into like a different topic. If you wouldn't mind, like actually writing this up for me, I'm having a little issue with the live text right now. But
not a problem.
So, what did you think of the story construction overall? So basically, what did you think of? You don't have to write all this down, but like this is more for those people watching. What did you think of the way that the overall story was told from beginning to end? We're not talking prose, we're not talking characters or anything as far as like delving into them specifically, but like the basic story structure and how it was built from beginning to climax to ending.
Yeah. So, in terms of story progression, this you could, in my opinion, you could set a clock to this book, right? It's very evenly paced, and it goes from start to finish, one chunk right after another. I feel like the ending, that build towards the climax, does happen a little bit faster than the build up. But again, that's probably how you want it to be in terms of a fantasy novel. The only problem, I shouldn't say the only problem, the biggest problem I have with the story build and the construction of the plot points and stuff with this book is It doesn't make any logical sense for that to actually happen in that order. The timing of things were too coincidental and too convenient.
Yeah, I would agree. I wouldn't say that they wouldn't happen like that, but it is too, I think you hit the nail on the head, too convenient for that to happen. There is one of the things that I noticed is also it is very much like your very typical fantasy hero's journey. Here you are with somebody with a greater destiny that is removed from something mundane, gets thrown into a wild world. There's a full, like, the meeting with the goddess is basically just like, hello, Dumbledore. But there's so much stuff that you can, like you said, set a timer to it, literally speaking. But I think one of the things that Rowling relies on pretty heavily is foreshadowing, but it goes beyond foreshadowing to being like the use of many a MacGuffin and Chekhov's gun, where like basically anything that you see at one point is going to get used later in a way that kind of just is meant to subvert expectations and be surprising, but it's like, no, you just told us what it did so you can throw it in the story later without interrupting it, which is actually a really useful skill as a writer, but when you rely on it too heavily, it can oversimplify and make things feel a little unearned. And objectively, I try to give it a little bit of a pass because it is a relatively short book. Like, we're used to like the last 4 or so, maybe 5. Yeah, the last 4 or so that were pretty thick. They're pretty big books. Sorcerer's Stone is not that long. And It was also a first, real novel.
I will say,
I just noticed that we had to permit the term climax there.
Yes. It's a funny one, right? Yeah. V.S. Drake brought up the how close the climax was to the end of the book. Definitely, that's kind of what I was hinting at too, with like the let's block this guy. Bye. Okay.
And the banhammer has been
by the way, viewers, if you offer promotions on here, you'll probably get the hammer, so don't do that. We're here to discuss, not promote. Except for our stuff, of course, because we're above the law.
We are the law.
Yeah, the climax definitely happens really quick in the book. I do remember thinking when I was listening to it, like, golly gee, there's only 2 hours left, and I know they've got to go into the Forbidden Forest, and they've got to do the whole dragon scene, and then they've got to figure it out, and then they actually got to go down through the trap door and do all the challenges. There's only 2 hours left.
Yeah, there's a lot of it that just kind of happens, and it's all of the setup is just like used as an excuse to, like, basically that was a dungeon speed run. Like, it really was.
To be fair, the dungeon had previously been cleared.
Oh man.
But yeah, I'd say, so for my timing comment, I think the timing before the climax was pretty well paced, and then you do typically have that speed up at the end. This one took it a little bit further than usual.
Yeah, and I think that was one of my issues with it as well, is and what I meant by it uses too heavily that I put this here in the beginning, so it just should follow that this stuff works in the end. And while the pacing was good for a lot of it, I think the end did feel a little bit rushed this read through. The other thing that doesn't help is I found myself having to parse it away from the movie because the movie does a lot better job of the pacing portion of it. and I had to like very specifically separate, like, no, this is the book, this is how I'm going to read it, and we'll have a separate discuss. I have to add this separate wall here to take away both nostalgia and the movie aspect of it. And I found myself a little surprised, at how quickly the end came around. It just was like, whew. There didn't feel like there was as much tension in those scenes as I remembered.
It was very intense for a 12-year-old. Less so as an adult.
I think that's not actually, I think that's a pretty good way to describe it, V.S. Drake, is that as an adult, this book feels somewhat contrived, or at the very least, the back half of it. Like, one thing I was really surprised about was how much detail there was in, like, the first 3 chapters before he even fucking gets to Hogwarts. Like, the amount that goes into that there's so much more of it, and I didn't remember that. I remember, like, the big bits, like the many owls and Hagrid coming to find him at the cabin, and finally getting to read his letter and the cake with his name on it, stuff like that. But that stuff felt a lot more similarly. It was simpler than I remembered, but it was still as compelling and felt like it had a lot more complexity to it than the end.
I think kind of going off of what V.S. Drake is saying about the what's safe for a bank or logic puzzles, is like this goes hand in hand with the story of Raiders of the Lost Ark. Voldemort / Quirrell probably would have never been able to get the stone out if not for Harry. Harry was the one who got it out. If Harry wasn't there, Dumbledore probably would have gotten back in time to stop him.
Entirely possible. Like, I don't quite think it's as bad as the Lost Ark because there's the chance that he gets it. But with the Lost Ark, it's pretty well known that, like, as soon as they open it, everybody dies. I think the assumption is that with the help of the, greatest evil wizard of all time, you could probably find a way to break it magically somehow, given enough time. But you're right. The odds are Dumbledore gets back in time and nothing fucking happens. But, then you don't have this explanation for what makes Harry so dangerous to Voldemort when he touches the scar. So it becomes a setup for the next book more than anything. And, that's a little disappointing for this one. And I agree with V.S. Drake, but maybe we should use this as a good segue into, like, what do we think about, like, the characters of this book now that we've reread it? Let's move on from story construction to character construction. What did you think about that?
So kind of similar to the plot being very, like, bullet point-esque, I really feel like a lot of these characters were checking off boxes for J.K. Rowling. Like, she had a character for every scenario, kind of a deal. Some of them were really well fleshed out. Obviously, those are going to be the ones that we continue to see through the series. Harry, Ron, and Hermione have very detailed personalities and are, in my opinion, very strict to their personalities. They don't waver from who they're meant to be. But in terms of characters like Quirrell, our main henchman baddie, Uh, the only real detail we get about him is he's a nervous talker and he went into the woods and got fucked up. So I feel like there's some middle ground missing in character descriptions in terms of describing him a little bit and describing him a lot. But I feel like everybody had very strong lines of where their personality existed, and they didn't stray from that.
Yeah, I agree, and I think I briefly glossed over it earlier, where I think a lot of people fit into these like archetypes, if not straight up stereotypes, where they get put in a lane and that's what they are, and that's all that they are. Uh, Harry is your typical leading man. Hermione is your typical smart sidekick, and Ron is the comic relief. And Dumbledore is your wise but kooky sage. And yeah, and I agree. He was a little more silly than I remembered in a lot of ways, but I didn't mind that, mostly because like I think a lot of us get caught up with the portrayal of him being super serious, and he was never serious in the books. He was always kind of weird. What I didn't like is how fucking insanely aloof he is for no damn reason. And like I get that that's the archetype that he plays, is he's only there when you absolutely need somebody to like insert Deus Ex Machina here, but I don't mind the silliness so much as like that. I found that a lot of characters are less characters and more set pieces. You know, they are meant to be they aren't people, they're characters to do a thing. Aside from Harry and arguably Ron and Hermione, even the Dursleys, like Drake mentions, were too mean. Like I've worked in and around foster care before, and those people don't just get ignored when you've got a kid who's like wasting away for 10 years. And like I get that they go to insane lengths to hide this from their neighbors and everything, but what they do to him is straight up abuse. And but then it's like waved off, oh, he'll be better off there. And yeah, I get it's solved later in the books, but I don't know how much of that was planned before. And a lot of characters that do get some attention feel like caricatures, like the memory of a kid of somebody rather than the actual person. Like no fucking teacher is going to get away with the shit that Snape did. Like just treating a single kid very clearly with that much bias. And Dumbledore presumably knows the history there. And just fucking
if we're to believe about Dumbledore's ability to know what's going on in the school, he knows about the abuse going on.
Exactly. So like there's a lot of things that just go kind of get hand waved and brushed under the rug, and I'm just like, that's not how it would work in real life. I get but I also remember as a kid thinking, yeah, I've got a teacher who's an asshole. Yeah, and it was easy to hate them because she created a character that was meant to fit a part. His part was to be the red herring.
Yeah.
That was Snape's part.
I think an important aspect to remember here too is, again, our target audience, like kind of what you were just saying. As a younger student, it's easier to equate Snape to a teacher we didn't like or whatever, and see that as believable, while at the same time, it's totally different than what we actually had in our real lives.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And V.S. Drake said it right, hit the nail on the head. It's very easy for kids to see good and bad when they are clear, and that's how you can tell that's the target demo. Is good and bad are like fairly clearly divided or supposedly divided, and then it's treated like some big reveal that somebody wasn't what you thought they were. But even that doesn't get the emotional poignancy it deserves, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, like, I wish there had been more delving into certain characters. Like, I don't expect them to fully flesh out like Seamus Finnegan when he was just, blew his eyebrows off or whatever. But it would have been nice to have a little more complexity to certain characters.
Yeah. So the topic I would like to pose is the logic behind the invented systems within this universe. Specifically, things like the magic system, Quidditch and house points, the dorm room setup. Like, how do you think those systems that J.K. Rowling invented for this story hold up as something that could exist in real life?
Um, so you're talking about like very concrete examples of world building and how they would like realistically be applied.
Yeah.
The house point system is dumb as shit, but like I know to some degree that used to happen in England. Like it's a different school system over there, and like the whole like rivalry and competition breeds success kind of thing. I could see it happening, but it's fucking stupid. And like I get that like if you have magic, you need certain things in place for discipline that you don't if magic doesn't exist.
Yeah.
But I thought that was a terrible way of doing it because especially considering how it seems to be so fucking arbitrary as to how points are taken and given. Um
Yeah. Yes, Drake catching all the auto mod tonight.
um I did like that there were some elements to it that did show like a different kind of school setup that just wasn't one of them. Like the houses, I don't mind as far as like it was kind of cool to like have like have people like grouped off. Like it was conceptually cool, but in reality, pigeonholing people into a certain set of characteristics seems a little problematic. um, like I know it was retroactively said, well, everybody can have some of these qualities. It was just a matter of who fell into certain ones. But like, yeah, echo chamber houses. Like you literally had one that never takes anybody but like purebloods or whatever. And
Yeah.
I'm like, and you've allowed this for how many years? Although we do find out later that at least one wasn't pure blood, but still, I digress. Um, then, as far as Quidditch is concerned, I think J.K. Rowling knew that she finally hit a home run with something because she puts more world building into Quidditch than she does almost anything else except maybe Hogwarts itself. And um, that was, I think, honestly a stroke of genius. It's a sport that makes sense that it would exist. You have the capability to offset most of the injuries from it in a way that you never could in, like, say, soccer was the example given. Um, I do like that it had a lot of the same kind of like culture around it as soccer, which was kind of interesting to see. And now that I know what soccer culture is like, I'm like, oh yeah, Quidditch definitely makes sense. At least the fandom of it does. I think that was a good look into like sports fandom in Europe and England in general, and I just didn't know it until much later in life.
Yeah.
As far as the magic system goes, other than the wand is a focus, I don't get it. Like, what the fuck's the difference between a charm, a jinx, and a hex? And can they be used in, like, is there some form of like synonym between them? Um, how do you know which is which? And that's spelled with an WHICH, not WITCH. And it's just like, here, magic exists. It was cool to know that there were certain spells, but those spells were essentially, again, like they were put in there to serve a purpose later. They weren't put in there to like build a magic system. It was just like the closest thing you get is the Wingardium Leviosa. It's Leviosa, not Leviosa. you know, uh, so like essentially somehow wiggling the wand in a certain way and pronunciation makes a difference. You have no fucking idea why, and for some reason you can write whole like 3 foot long essays on this shit, and we get zero look into that.
Yeah.
And I found that, especially given as much as we've read, I found that so frustrating. But as a kid, you don't need it to be any more complex. Could it have been? Absolutely. And that's why this is just a long children's novel. I would not even classify this one as YA, because YA has more complexity than this. This is a children's book, a children's novel.
Yeah. I classify it as young reader. You could get a little bit into young adult in terms of, I think, some of the context, but I'd say 90% of this book is young children's stuff. But yeah, I agree with you on almost every point in terms of the logic of contrived systems. Sorry, it's of systems that are contrived. I agree that Quidditch is something that really hit home. For me, what I found particularly interesting about the Quidditch rules is for the first 3 books, and I won't go into details to avoid spoilers if somebody's watching who hasn't continued the series, but for the first 3 books, I was like, the Seeker is OP, the Golden Snitch is OP. There's no way anybody's ever going to lose except for not catching the snitch. That's the only way to lose. Why is anybody else there? And then in book 4, they're like, J.K. Rowling's like, yeah, but, and then shows you an example of where that's not the case. So,
yeah, and you're absolutely right. Like, I still find it to be a home run because it was one of the few like bigger ideas that was well fleshed out, aside from that one kind of point. But
well, I mean, that's kind of my point, though, is like with established sports in the real world, we have that same kind of mentality sometimes where we're like, this sport would be a lot better if we made this one change. Mm-hmm. And we think we're so smart for making that one change, but in reality, like, it's probably not. It's probably fine how it is because it's been like that. It's been fleshed out. That's how it's played. And I get that exact same feeling with Quidditch where I'm like, this is cool, but I think it would be better if, and then later we're like, oh yeah, okay, maybe not.
Yeah, and there's some lead into that because they even talk about how like these games can go on for literal days, weeks, and months, and
we don't see that in the books, but we hear about it in the books.
we hear about it in the books like as hearsay, but or not hearsay, but as a part of like the world building that V.S. Drake is talking about. Quidditch is a vehicle for a lot of things in this book, and I think it's because it was probably one of the better fleshed out ideas that Rowling had, and she just kind of leaned into it.
Yeah.
I think it was a little, maybe a little much to make the snitch worth that much, but it's, it winds up being fine in the end, but we're only talking about this one. That's a good point, V.S. Drake, is that Rowling does a good job of showing and not necessarily telling, which I think lends itself to the prose of this. And it works really well through most of the book until the very end, when there is all show and no tell for the most part, until like the exposition at the end.
Yeah.
And
all right, we got time for a couple more topics. Any heavy hitters you want to throw in?
I kind of had something similar to what you asked about here, but I'll open up to be something more broad, and I will disqualify one thing because we've talked about it quite a bit. Aside from Quidditch, what do you think was the greatest strength of the writing in this book? It can be a single thing, concept, or overall theme, whatever.
Yeah. For me, I think the strongest point of this book is its simplicity. It doesn't overburden the reader with extraneous side routes of storyline. It's pretty straight and direct to the point. Every aspect of this book lends to the main plot in some way. You may not realize it at the time, but in the end, you go, "Oh yeah, that part at where Gringotts was robbed was very relevant in the end." Stuff like that. It's very streamlined and to the point. I think that's really important for young readers to not have distractions along the way. It definitely fleshes out a world and story way better to add those side routes, but again, that's really more of a mature audience expectation. So going with the expected audience, I think Rowling did a really well job of keeping to the point and keeping the reader engaged with the main story.
I have to agree with a lot of that. Like those were all very well done, but I think the greatest strength is kind of encapsulated, at least partially, in what V.S. Drake said, where they said it's the strength was that it was concise, creative, and exactly what was needed for the demo. I want to focus on the creative bit, and I thought what really set this above was J.K. Rowling's ability to simply and creatively capture whimsy in a way that I think that's what set it above and beyond, and what made it so, like, because there's plenty of other books that are concise and creative and are appeal to their demo. I think it was that sense of whimsy and that ideal combined specifically with the idea that this world could exist and we never knew it, so you could be the next person. It captures that idea that there could be something bigger for anybody, and it has just the right amount of whimsy to do that. Like the ability to create things that capture the imagination, like that don't necessarily serve like a huge purpose for like character growth or overall world building. Like the closest she comes to that is Quidditch, but there are other things that are a lot more simple, like the fact that owls deliver letters is a thing. Like that's whimsical as shit. The fact that
you're like, why not ravens or something? Sorry.
But there's there's lots of little things like that in the spells, in things like Birdie Bots every flavored beans and chocolate frogs, and like these things that are just kind of like and that toads are gauche. Um, there's all these little bits that I think capture the imagination in these subtle, easy to grasp ways, and I think that's where the appeal starts to go beyond just kids. That's the bit that makes it so popular even outside of its target demographic, is there's these cool, super creative things that look like they could exist in a world where any sort of magic could happen, and she sets that up by basically implying everything magical that you've ever heard about exists. It's just been hiding in the background. You just didn't know it was there. And so anybody can connect with the magic system because they're like, oh, all of these legends that we knew are true, they just were hidden by magic.
Yeah.
And she did it, and that's where she did it, by showing, not telling. And I think the fact that she captured it with that kind of whimsy and wonder, the ability to connect to the world, because it wouldn't be impossible in the system for you to be a part of it. I think that's what gave it the broad appeal, and that's what I think sets it above and beyond.
Yeah, I definitely agree with what you're saying. I think Rowling really set up the market for Harry Potter merchandise well, with all of the things she invented in the universe, like Birdie Bots every flavored beans and the toads and the frogs and stuff. You go to, let's say, Barnes and Noble, and they have this huge Harry Potter section of just stuff you can buy for the Harry Potter universe. And that's unlike any other universe that we see. You get massive universes like Tolkien's Lord of the Rings universe is massive and has tons of details, but you don't see the same kind of wanderlust capture that Harry Potter has, because Harry Potter is relatable and potentially, existable in suspended belief sort of reality. But yeah.
Yeah, it seems like
merchandising.
Yeah, and it seems like J.K. Rowling hit V.S. Drake on the head as a kid, like exactly like being in on the secret. It's relatable, it's simple, it's easy to apply. Like, there is nothing spectacular about the overall story to this, but there are spectacular elements in the book, and it's very simply described, and it allows you to feel like there is more to the world, and lends like, I could adventure within this world. I could love being a part of this world because it's so broad spectrum. And and when something is that simple, merchandising is a lot easier than,
all right, sorry, go ahead.
A lot easier than I was going to say a lot easier than the concept of darkness made manifest. Like, how do you merchandise that?
So we've already kind of hit on it a little bit, but officially, what were your final thoughts, and how do you think it held up as an adult?
Well, my final thoughts are, I am glad that I went and reread it, because I think I got a better, more objective view of what this book is about. I understand it for what it is, and I didn't lose all of my nostalgia for it, but it has been, I think, healthily redirected in some ways, because now I have a better appreciation for like what I liked about it then, what I like about it now, and there are things to like. It's just you can't go at this as an adult without either the nostalgia to overcome the fact that this is very, very simple, or being okay with the fact that this is a kid's book. This is a not like a little kids, but yeah, it's a young. I think you said it right, Adam. It's a young reader's book, and I don't think that it will ever hold the same place. Another of my final thoughts is I don't think it'll ever hold the same place in future generations' hearts as it did in those of us that grew up with it, because we were growing up with the main character, and there's a level of excitement to that. And this was, quite honestly, very, very new for its time. Like, there are books geared towards young people, but this kids book that evolves into something that's meant to be like a young adult novel, like the books evolve with the reader.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's what it was built to be, or that's what it turned into anyway. And so tempering that, I now see the appeal. I don't think we have to have that to appreciate it. Like, I could say, if I were ever to have kids, I could share this with them and be like, hey, this is a book that you'll like, and you might like reading these as well later down the road. Or, I can do the same thing that my mom did and start off reading them with them and then let them go off on their own if they still like it. I don't feel as big a need to impress my nostalgia onto anybody with it, though, because I get that there's a lot of it that is just, this was a formative part of my youth. And I realize where that line is now. So, but my final thoughts ultimately are, it's a decent read for young readers. I think adults can have some fun with it. I would recommend going into it if you're reading as an adult, just understanding that this is not geared towards you as an adult.
Yeah.
Like, so if you're going, but I do think it's worth a read if you feel like you want to continue reading through the whole thing, because it does set up a lot of concepts that you need for later. Like, it's worth, and I don't think you'll be necessarily like, I think it's worth a read if you haven't before and you like fantasy and you're okay with it building to something that's more relatable. But it is not going to be directly relatable to you, or at least not as directly relatable to you as it will like a 10 to 12-year-old kid. So just be prepared.
Yeah. For me, the V.S. Drake said it too. I'm really excited to introduce this to my kids. I don't think they'll have the same experience that we had. That I think that was a once in a history moment where we had the opportunity to grow up and have a book release every year, every 2 years, whatever it may be, with us aging up as the writing gets more complex. And that, I think, that experience was just built such a strong nostalgic factor that it's hard to objectively look at this book as an adult and be like, was it a good book for an adult or not? And I think it's safe to say that in terms of adult books, this one is lacking.
Mm-hmm.
But with that nostalgia factor added in, yeah, I enjoy going back to it. This is not my first time as an adult rereading Harry Potter, re-listening to Harry Potter. I've listened to both of the two popular narrators for Harry Potter, as well as reread the physical books a number of times. And it's really enjoyable because of that nostalgia factor. And just the nostalgia alone was so strong the first time I was going through this that, like, this is safe to say because my dad's not on here right now. But when I got the 7th book at midnight, my parents said, "Now you have to go to bed. Do not stay up and read this book." and I totally stayed up and finished it before dawn. I slept for a couple hours, and I covered my ass and reread it that next day, so that nobody knew what I did.
Bullshit! I knew what you did because I did the same damn thing. I was there with you when we got the book, and I read it, and we both like called each other the next day. We're just like,
yeah.
But I think, like, absolutely agree. I don't think it's going to be super enjoyable for an adult. If you're sharing it with somebody, I think it would be enjoyable to share, and I think it could be worthwhile if you're willing to commit to the whole series. But as like a standalone novel for an adult, probably not. And I am one thing the nostalgia thing that I think really makes it separate for our generation is not just the like, because you could replicate the release every like year or so by just waiting a year to read the book. But I think what made it so special was how popular it was, and it wasn't just us. It was a whole generation of a shit ton of people who all got excited together about something year after year. And that is the part that is just once in a generation.
Yeah. Just the hundreds of people who would show up for the midnight release at bookstores. Like, I don't know if that will ever be recreated.
Oh yeah, the release parties were wild. Like that.
Yeah.
You know, I remember sitting in one of those lines. I think it was for Order of the Phoenix or Goblet of Fire. I can't remember which, but I was waiting in line. Actually, I think it was with you, Adam. And I don't know if you remember, but as soon as we got the book, I had to turn around and leave and go on like a church mission trip or something like that. Like at 6 a.m. and we didn't get out of there until like 2 a.m. because we were towards the end of the line.
Yeah.
And I remember still being on that bus. Everybody is asleep, and I'm sitting there at first in this book. And there's something really cool about that, and I would love to see another generation replicate that. I really would. But I don't know that we're gonna see quite that same thing. And for that, like, I could never like bring myself, like, I'm always gonna love this book series for that, if nothing else. And yeah. But anyways, I think we got to wrap things up now, unless we have any quick final. I mean, there will be another something, but not another book necessarily, I don't think. But anyways.
Yeah. So yeah, I think that's it for Harry Potter tonight. Let's talk wrap stuff. So for our next books, we've got for February 25th. So later this month, at the end of the month, How High We Go in the Dark by Sequoia Nagamatsu. I hope that's the way you pronounce that. And then our new book for after that has been decided to be We Are Legion or We Are Bob by Dennis E. Taylor. That's for March 25th.
All right, and coming up for April, we are going to be doing Pulitzer Prize winners. Nobel Prize in Literature books. So we are doing like the highest award-winning books for those for April. So if you have anything for us for that, just let us know. You've probably got a couple days before we actually put up our list. And for May, that will be our usual, just a reminder, everybody will get to vote in May. So bring people around, get hyped now so that we can have you all there with us later. Anyways, let's do some quick plugs.
Sure thing. DMstable.com is our primary website for all things DM's Table in the 800s. If you like more information about what we do or links to our various websites that we're affiliated with, such as Patreon and Etsy and stuff, go to DMstable.com. Literally everything you could ever want to know about us is there. We also have an Etsy page, as previously mentioned. That's dmstable.com/Etsy. We sell cool 3D printed nerd stuff, so you should check it out. Go check out our YouTube link if you haven't yet. Links below the video. We post everything there. Patreon.com/DMstable is the link for Patreon if you want to vote, if you want to get in on telling us what to read next. After these next 2 books, a new vote will be appearing soon. So check it out, subscribe, and you'll be able to vote too. If you'd like to reach out to us on our socials, we primarily stick to Facebook and Twitter. That's at the DM's Table for Facebook and at DM's Table for Twitter. And if you'd like a more personal touch, we have quite the nerd culture discussion going on our Discord server. You can join us there by messaging us on either Facebook or Twitter, and we'll get you the link for the Discord. And Alex already mentioned the plugs for future books, or the themes for future books. So that, I think all that's left to do is say thank you for joining us tonight.
Yeah, thanks for coming back to for the new year, everybody. Love to hear from you and hope we get to see more of you for our next book. So yeah. We'll see you then.
Peace.